I'm Jessica Denson, and you're watching a special Sunday Night Live episode of Lights On. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe here to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. I am the founder of the Removal Coalition. I've also been one of the few who has been covering what are very evident election anomalies since right after the 2024 election, looking at concrete data, at actual evidence, interviewing election security experts who understood that we could not make election security and election integrity a issue that we were too afraid to discuss. It has never been more vital that we pay attention to this conversation when so much is being vested in our ability to remove this criminal administration via an election. And we cannot do that. We cannot do that without looking back at 2024 and what very evidently appears to have been an election that was manipulated on multiple fronts. I'm going to be joined in just a moment by someone who has been investigating this in a series over the past year, taking a deep dive into voter registration records and patterns. She has been analyzing elections since 2020. She's a former investigative journalist for the Pulitzer Prize winning outlet DCReport, founded by David K. Johnston, where she was covering election integrity and national intelligence issues. She previously became widely known for her deep dive into Mitch McConnell's improbable election results in 2020 under the handle Grassroots Speak on Twitter. She has just now released a new 2024 election investigation series beginning in Florida. And today she's going to talk about that with us, uncover a lot of very crucial data that she has uncovered from election records and inconsistencies. She just launched a new Substack called It's Up to Us. And just to tee us off on this conversation tonight, I want to play for you a clip from just before the 2024 election. This is of Tom Bonnier, who works for a group called Target Smart, a data firm that analyzed voter registration patterns and data. And here he is talking to Major Garrett at CBS about the absolute spike in enthusiasm and voter registration leading up to 2024. I want you to think about this and remember how much we were told after the 2024 election that there was just low voter turnout, this seemingly improbable voter turnout, and ask yourself how that jives with this report on a surge in voter enthusiasm and registration.
It's a surge in voter registration in key groups ahead of the November election. Among young Black women, registration is up more than 175%. You heard that right, more than 175% in 13 states. That's compared to the same time in 2020. This, according to the data firm Target Smart. Registration has also increased among young Latinas and Black Americans. Tom Bonnier joins us now. He's a senior advisor at Target Smart. Tom, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in. 175%, can that possibly be right? You must have triple-checked this, or many more times than that.
You're right to repeat the number because I've more than triple-checked it. It's incredibly unusual to see changes in voter registration that are anywhere close to this. I mean, to remind people, 175% is almost tripling of registration rates among this specific group. You just don't see that sort of thing happen in elections normally.
And what does that tell us, if anything, about either enthusiasm, attention, propensity to vote for these newly registered participants?
Tells us a lot. The reason that we look at this voter registration data is because the polls will only tell us so much. The polls tell us how people are going to vote. They don't tell us if or who is going to vote. It's a big question. The best indicator of that is the actions that people are taking. Number one, registering to vote. Generally, it's an indicator of a broader enthusiasm among that specific group. So people who are already registered to vote, who look like those voters who are registering to vote, tend to vote at higher rates when you see those surges in registration.
What do we know about Republican registration and men?
Well, for the longest time, really from 2000 forward, we were seeing Republicans winning the registration battle, so to speak, especially in key states like Pennsylvania, Michigan and elsewhere, you were seeing them register more voters. They had more intensity and enthusiasm. And so this is important because our analysis started on July 21st, which is the day that President Biden announced that he'll be withdrawing from the race, and Kamala Harris announced her candidacy. And so that moment seems to be a potential tipping point in this race where we're seeing suddenly Democrats saying, I'm fired up, I want to participate. And since then, you've seen Democrats out registering Republicans.
Democrats out registering Republicans, 175% spike in registration among young Black women. Are you going to try to tell me that that voting bloc went heavy for Donald Trump, helping him sweep 7 swing states on election night before we went to sleep? I don't think so. I am so glad to have with me tonight Alison Greene, because I know this tees right up with her work. She's going to reveal to us what she has found in vanishing votes in voter registration files in a state that was identified by Robert Mueller as being targeted by the Russians, malware that was never mitigated, never taken care of. Our elections are not secure. Please join me in welcoming to the show Alison Greene. Alison, welcome to Lights On.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm so glad you're shining a light on all of this.
My pleasure. I mean, like you and I have talked about offline, this could not be more vital when we literally have a man who is trying to tear American democracy apart, claiming he has a mandate when we don't even know for certainty that he won the election that he is now carrying out the administration of. And so many people are putting their stock in a future election. There could not be a more important conversation, I don't think, to have about what needs to be done to secure our democracy.
Exactly. I mean, we're literally watching our democracy be bulldozed. And so many people are saying, what can we do? And you have a great sign behind you, remove the regime. I'm very excited for what you're doing about that, because so many times the leaders are kind of shying away from impeachment and saying things like, well, we just have to vote them out. But what I've actually found is highlighting a critical question is, what if we can't vote them out? And we're all gearing up for 2026. And, again, remove the regime is going to be on November 22nd. That will be less than a year away from the midterms. And everything is so close. And people are going to be working their butts off to get the vote out. And I want to make sure that we're doing it in ways where we're informed about everything that's going on, and in ways that we can be strategic about what we can do to protect the vote in 2026. There couldn't be anything more important right now.
Yeah, I think then you would agree that this starts by looking back to 2024 and possibly even before that. This is not new, to how our elections have been compromised and how we have failed to properly audit and verify our elections in the face of unprecedented foreign interference, not to mention domestic interference. I know your investigation has a lot to do with the assessment of intelligence agencies with the Mueller report. Can you kind of just give us a background on that?
Sure. So I'm actually going to go beyond the Mueller report too. I actually found the Senate Intelligence Report has incredible information, but this even goes back even further. I mean, ironically, there was an ODNI, Office of Director of National Intelligence report that came out on January 6th of 2017 that started to send a warning out to everybody. That kind of got missed in a chaotic 2016 election, year, and it was right before the infamous inauguration of Trump in 2016. But at that time, officials had started to learn that really what was going on was Russian interference into our elections. And as we've gone on, there's been a lot more. There was an NSA a classified report that was leaked by Reality Winner in 2017. There was the Mueller investigation, but even before his Mueller investigation, there were actually indictments of 12 GRU officers, two for directly interfering with our elections. Now, you can still go, and if you actually want to go onto my Substack and see all my sources and references, I actually have the FBI direct link to the most wanted, which still shows that those 12 GRU officers are still on the FBI's most wanted list because nothing's been done. And I just kept uncovering more and more that pointed to 2016 as definitive, and there is. I mean, the U.S. intelligence, Bob Woodward did great reporting where he came out with his book in 2020, Rage, which I'll give you a quote here. That book said that malware, which had been placed in St. Lucie County, could erase every 10th voter, almost certainly reducing the vote count. This is from a reported briefing that happened with all the top intelligence officials to President Trump in 2018, shortly after he stood on the stage next to Putin and said, I believe Putin. And what these top officials were doing was trying to get him to warn the American public and to warn him before the 2018 midterms. This briefing took place in the White House Situation Room, according to the reports. And the way that it was presented was that the NSA and CIA had evidence, highly classified, that the Russians had placed malware in the election registration system in at least 2 counties in Florida, St. Lucie County and Washington County. I'm actually sitting right now in St. Lucie County. And so that was one of the reasons why I was actually, I started this investigation. I'm so glad that you actually showed that clip of what Target Smart was talking about, because they were looking into these incredibly unusual registration patterns as of July 21st. I literally started monitoring the registration patterns here in St. Lucie County on August 3rd, 2024.
Wow.
So I was actually monitoring it right around the same time they did. But what the clip you showed was prior to the 2024 election. I actually was monitoring those registration numbers for a while, both before and after the election. And I mean, he talked about how incredibly unusual they were. I would say they defy logic in a number of ways.
So do you think that they defy logic as in there was not that much support for Kamala Harris? Because that's what he was insinuating. He was insinuating that after Biden exited the race, there was a surge in enthusiasm for Harris, which many of us saw. I mean, we saw these stadiums that usually accommodate, Beyonce and Taylor Swift filling up for Kamala Harris. There seemed to be incredible enthusiasm. So you don't think that the 175% spike could have been real?
Well, I'm not sure that the numbers are real. And the reason I say that is that, the registration patterns that I was seeing really set off this investigation. It was not proof of anything. It was not evidence of anything, but it was very unusual. So, for example, in Florida, the registration deadline in Florida closed October 7th, 2024. So, as I said, I was actually monitoring, and I think I sent you a screen grab to kind of show how I was monitoring. But basically, the St. Lucie County Supervisor of Elections was almost one or two more, I think. But the St. Lucie County elections officials, there you go, they actually published the active registered voters. This screen grab happens to be from January 13th, 2025, and shows that there were a total of 248,518 voters. But what I was doing was monitoring, and I was taking screenshots on a regular basis. And after October 7th, I expected that I wouldn't have to monitor those numbers anymore because registration had closed in Florida, and I expected that the numbers would pretty much come to a standstill, but they didn't. They actually increased after the Florida registration date came and gone of October 7th. And then the thing that was really perplexing was that after Election Day, again, we were seeing daily registrations happening up until November 25th, people were still registering. We had the highest number of Republicans registering just days after the October 7th deadline for Florida registration closed, which that's what I mean by defies logic. And we actually had the highest number of Democrats registering after the 2024 election. And I this was something that it wasn't sitting right with me. So what I did was I immersed myself in the research. And what I was finding is whether it was the Mueller report, the Senate Intelligence Report, the ODNI reports, DHS, ODNI, FBI, CIA, NSA, there was a trend. They were saying that the Russians were specifically targeting voter registration databases. And what they were actually saying there, too, was that not only were the Russians targeting the voter registration databases in Florida and successfully got into 2 counties, including St. Lucie, but they were saying they targeted all 50 states. So as I was reading this, there was no reason given for why they were targeting it, because they kept saying it doesn't affect the vote count. And there's people such as Ron DeSantis, for example, was saying there's no manipulation. There was voter data that was able to be got, but there was no manipulation. And you had Rick Scott saying, okay, they got into 2 counties, but they didn't change any rules or votes. I never heard anybody say that they got them out of the St. Lucie County election systems. And I also never heard an explanation for why they were targeting the voter registration systems if they weren't going to impact the election results.
Why would they go to those lengths if they weren't actually going to do something? I mean, we've known this for years, that Trump has been a cultivated Russian asset. You cited that one incident in Helsinki. We've had another horrific, abominable incident in this administration where he rolled out the red carpet for Putin, for some non-existent peace deal with Ukraine. It's disgusting. And it's so evident that we have a Russian plant, not to mention a plant of so many foreign adversaries in our White House right now. But what is your theory? Just, when I went, if we can go back to that video, my theory when I heard Tom Bonier speak about that spike, and I know what we've been talking about, was that to me seems like a logical spike, or at least a logical pattern, that there was heightened enthusiasm, but then somehow that possibly Democratic voters were removed from the rolls after that. Is that something that your investigation has found that could have happened?
Yes. So what my investigation found was the phrasing seemed to be, and I will go off book for a second if I get it completely, a little bit wrong. But basically, the premise was that Russian hackers, GRU hackers, had actually gotten into the voter registration records to be able to add, delete, or alter voter data. And so when I started looking at the registration numbers, what I started doing was actually asking for public record information. And the public record information started to reveal almost identical to what it was that US intelligence had been warning. So US intelligence had actually been warning that the malware could erase every 10th voter, almost certainly reducing the total vote count. And when I actually got the public records request, I think there is something that we have here which lays it all out. There you go. So the Florida Division of Elections, the official state numbers that were published is that there were 242,944 active registered voters in St. Lucie County for the 2024 election. So when I started to ask for public records requests, I expected that the active registered voter list would include 242,944 registered voters, or maybe a few more had creeped in to the rolls. But what I found was 217,625 active registered voters were provided to me as part of a public records request from the county itself. St. Lucie County of Elections voter registration database produced this report that had 25,319 voters missing, according to the Florida Division of Elections numbers. I did go back and I thought, okay, maybe there is a way that they can actually legally remove voters. I found about 1,000 voters that the state has said that they legally removed during that time, but there was still approximately 24,319 voters who were missing, which is almost exactly 1 in every 10th voter in St. Lucie County that was deleted. And so what that is suggesting to me is exactly what they had said. This malware could delete 1 in every 10th voter record. And what that meant was that it also reduced the total vote count. So in Bob Woodward's book, they actually mention that, right after that, they actually talk about that it can be done. The code was so advanced, it could target specific demographic areas. So for example, they're saying that every 10th voter in areas with higher percentages of Black residents could actually be deleted, almost certainly reducing the total vote count for Democrats. Now, they also followed that up to reassure Trump that the same could be said, that the Russian malware could be deleting the vote count for Republicans. But the reality is we can't necessarily see whose voter records were deleted. But as I started to dig into the numbers, it became very clear that not only were there potential issues with deleting records, but I was also seeing evidence of adding records. So the best way I can give, I always think of it as we see those commercials that say 4 out of 5 dentists recommend.
Right.
I think we would all know that if 7 out of 5 dentists recommended, the numbers are wrong. And that's the best way I can explain what I was seeing, because in 35 out of 61 precincts, there was the equivalent of 7 out of 5 voters were voting for the president. And so there were more votes for the president than there were actual voters in 57% of the precincts in St. Lucie County.
Yeah, this is the graphic I had up a minute ago, which is crazy.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, 57% of the precincts in the same exact county where, our intelligence was saying, yes, they got in. And so there were more votes for president than there were voters. So I've seen the numbers where it appears that they're adding. I've seen the numbers where it appears that they're deleting. But I also met with the supervisor of elections and asked her about those registration numbers. And I said to her, can you explain how it is that you've got more people registering to vote after election day, and I was able to show her all of my screen grabs, everything.
What did she say?
She said, actually, that I can explain. She said, we got a lot of people who showed up thinking that they were registered to vote, but they weren't. So we couldn't allow them to cast a ballot, but we could actually allow them to register for the next election.
So let me jump in with a question, because this was my question to you earlier. When in the process of voting, or us getting the vote counts, does the deletion happen? Does it happen so that somebody shows up and they can't vote, or are they casting a vote and then after the fact their vote is being deleted? And is that something that the Russian malware would be capable of doing?
So the answer is yes, it's something that the Russian malware is absolutely capable of doing, according to all of the U.S. intelligence and Marco Rubio and DeSantis and Scott. Yes, they could get in and they can alter the records. I mean, I've got here, I put up a quote. Senator Marco Rubio says he can guarantee that the Russians will interfere with the next U.S. election. The real threat isn't what already happened with Russian election interference in 2016, but what could happen in 2018 and beyond. This was Marco Rubio before he was the, Secretary of State.
Before he had his soul snatched out of his body entirely. And
possibly,
yes,
yeah.
Yes,
he
Marco
was a
Rubio
Florida senator. He was on the Senate Intelligence Committee,
Yeah.
and they were all saying that, yes, the Russian malware could add, delete, and alter. So when you ask, was it deleting the votes, after they were counted, after they were cast, or altering them so that people can't cast? I believe it's both, because the way that they phrased it, specifically with the intelligence agencies, is they said the malware could erase every 10th voter, almost certainly reducing the total vote count. So what I believe they were actually saying there is that by deleting the voter record, the ballot that goes with that voter record is also being deleted. Now, one of the things that's incredibly complicated, and this is something that is not meant for a viral headline. We try to go and unpack it and as much as we can. And in the series, we're going to explain that one of the things that U.S. intelligence was saying is the reason that they didn't believe that this could have a big impact was because there's two separate systems within our election infrastructure. There are the vote tallying machines. When I did my research in 2020, it really pointed me to the vote tallying machines, and that was what I was focused on.
And this was in your research about Mitch McConnell in Kentucky.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that was really where I first saw issues and problems with the numbers coming out of the vote tallying machines. But this time around, I was looking at the voter registration data, but I actually worked closely with Nathan Taylor and with the Election Truth Alliance throughout this investigation. And together we said, okay, let's also look at the vote tally in St. Lucie County. And we asked for the records of the votes. And we were given records of the batches of votes. So this is not connected to the voter registration system. And what we found was there were 23 batches of votes that were not accounted for in the audit trail. Each batch.
Unpack that a little bit. Say that again.
Okay. There was a sequential list of batches of votes. And what we found was there were some gaps in the sequential numbers. There were approximately 23 batches that were missing. The average
missing from what? Missing from what was reported to the public, or where were they missing from? Okay.
Correct. So when they actually showed the final tally, which is the published results, that was based on numbers where we cannot account for these 23 batches that were missing. And I should stress that every batch had different amounts of votes in it. So for
And how did you
example,
know those 23 batches should be there? What was the initial data set that told you they should exist?
sure. So public records requests, and we got a sequential list of initially, the first list was all of the mail-in ballots, and those were all sequential batches with nothing missing from the mail-in ballots. Then we got the list of both early voting batches and election day batches. The first thing that popped up really quickly was that it actually showed sequential numbers. And the first batch was, and I apologize, I can't remember off the top of my head, but let's say it was like EV-0031. That's not it exactly, but it's probably pretty close. And then it went to EV-0044.
Right.
So before we actually got into anything, we went back to the public records request and asked for an explanation of where these missing batches, those first 12, had gone.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, those were used for training, which didn't really make a lot of sense to us. But in the meantime, we had done more digging and we found more gaps. So it would go from 68 to 70, where was 0069. It would go to from 72 to 74, where was 0073. So altogether, there were 23 batches that are just not listed in the sequential numberings. And when you look at the totals of all of those batches, it shows what Florida, it's not exact, which is also very interesting, but it's pretty damn close to what Florida said was the total vote count in St. Lucie County. The average batch had...
So the official report is basically a total that excludes those batches.
Correct. And each batch has an average of about 500 votes. It
and let's
could
just
be
get this out of the way. Who won in St. Lucie? Who won in St. Lucie County in 2024 presidential?
It was all the way down the ballot. It was all Republican wins except for two positions. The election of the supervisor of elections is a Democrat. She won, and the tax collector is a Democrat. He won, and everything else is all Republican down ballot.
Trump and Republican all the way down.
All the way down.
So I know that your investigation included not only digging into public records, but also physically going into neighborhoods and homes that were identified as registered voters. And this is just kind of blows me away what you found. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so Nathan Taylor from Election Truth Alliance.
So by the way, for any new viewers, sometimes I get these, where's Nathan on? I will remind everybody that Lights On was the first platform to platform the Election Truth Alliance back in January. And we covered them repeatedly on this program. And I'm sure at some point Nathan will be back, likely when they hopefully file their lawsuit. But anyway.
Which please. I'm working with him on the Florida lawsuit as well. And actually, I got a message from Nathan saying, Jessica will take care of you, because I said, it's been a little while since I've been on, and you're literally the first place where I'm unpacking this new election series other than Substack. And Nathan said, oh, Jessica was my first as well. Take care of you. So Nathan actually flew to Florida, and because I said, I think that you should really come here and see this data beyond the spreadsheets. Now, I had done some investigation and had kind of ideas of where we were going, but never in my wildest dream would I believe that the first door we knocked on was as problematic as it was. I took him to a new construction community. We have a lot of gated communities here in Florida, and this one was under construction. And I went to this community specifically because I knew that it was brand new. And in fact, I found houses where the owners of those houses did not purchase until after the election, but they were registered and casting votes in the election. So the first door we knocked on, it was after the election. They were very, very accommodating, very, very nice, very sweet. And they said, yes, we voted at our old house in Palm Beach County because we didn't yet own this place. We moved in after Thanksgiving. But the records seem to show that the husband cast a vote also here in St. Lucie County, and they seem to have no idea. We went to a bunch of other places. We have what we call like a phantom precinct, which means that in the official records, this precinct doesn't exist, but it actually has 5 voters in the registration database, and 4 of those voters cast ballots. And I wanted to take Nathan there because I had noticed that the address of all 5 voters in this phantom precinct that wasn't supposed to exist, it was the same address. So when I pulled up, there it was, the UPS store. And he said, maybe they live upstairs. We went to the UPS store. We said, does anybody live anywhere in this building? And they're like, no, that's like a fake facade upstairs. There's
and voters couldn't have been using the mailboxes at that UPS store.
So the problem with that is that there's no other contact details listed on the voter records. So, you're allowed to use a PO box, but
a mailing address, but not as a physical address.
And there's no other way to contact them. And 4 of those votes were counted. And this particular precinct doesn't even exist in the official book closing with the state. So, and then we went to a boat marina where we asked there were 15 registered voters there. And we asked the woman who manages the boat marina, does anybody live here? And she goes, oh God, I hope not. And then we went through the names with her. She recognized some of them had boats there, but they didn't actually live there. Others she didn't know. So this boat marina has 15 registered voters there, and at least, there may be more that I might have missed, but at least 15 registered voters there. 11 of them had ballots counted, and they don't live there. So, and she even said some of them are in neighboring counties. They just have their boat here.
What is your theory there? Is your theory that they were illegally using that address, or that someone else had identified them maliciously as St. Lucie County voters when they had no intention of being that?
Both Nathan and I remarked that it didn't seem like the people necessarily knew that people were voting for them. And you have to realize that, the voter registration records are all linked to the DMV. And in St. Lucie County, the DMV was hacked in October of 2023. So it's not...
It gets worse and worse, Alison.
And worse would also be the fact that the voter registration system in St. Lucie County, it actually went dark 3 different times in the 2024 election cycle. Primary night, the week of early voting, and the day of election day, the voter registration database went dark. So you have the ability in real time that systems are kind of going down and coming back up. You have the DMV, which has been hacked, that data records are being accessed. And so when I saw the clip that you started with, I'm sitting there saying, everybody's assuming these voter registration numbers are real. But all of that is, he talked about 175% increase, for example, in young Black women. Okay. Yeah. I can tell you right now, the guy who is on the most wanted list and is still in Russia could easily be creating a voter registration for a young Black woman who is a Democrat, but still cast a ballot for them as a Republican. So to me, it doesn't necessarily have, we don't know in this country how somebody votes. So you can be adding registered Democrats, registered Republicans. And that was one of the things
Would they
that,
have any incentive to create voter registration files with that demographic? Wouldn't that more expose their plot than not, to create files for people who would be inclined, just from public perception, to vote the other way?
Well, there would be people who say, yeah, no, young Black women are definitely voting more Republican these days. Look at the numbers. So it almost becomes that they use those numbers potentially to convince that that the registration numbers are shifting in certain ways. So I don't know the answer to that, but what I can tell you is St. Lucie
A lot of
County.
psyops going on, basically, is the answer.
Yeah, and what I noticed though too about the voter registration numbers when I started on August 3rd monitoring them is that the percentages never changed. No matter how many people were added to the rolls, your percentage was always 37% Republican, 34.5% Democrat, 25%, I think it was 25%. I have to check my numbers again, but I think it was 25% were NPA, which is no party affiliation, and 3.5% were other. And even when there was no other candidates, when there was no third party, when, no matter what, the percentages never changed. So it felt that they were adding to the Democrats, the Republicans, the NPAs, and the others almost in an equivocally, like an equivalency. And it was like they had their finger on the scale. And it didn't make sense to me how these numbers kept rising on a daily basis, but the percentages never shift.
Never fluctuated. This is something that Nathan and ETA have shown time and time again, is just these patterns do not exemplify human behavior. There is something just completely non-organic about so much of the data that came out of 2024. You're talking about private vendors. I think you mentioned the private vendor that was hacked in 2016 that still runs Florida voter systems. What's really scary about, our elections in this country, and this is a much more extensive conversation, is just the way in which private companies leverage power over our elections. And one thing that a lot of people are talking about right now is the purchase of Dominion by Liberty, which is this right-wing group. I had a really interesting conversation last night with someone from Venezuela who was talking about how the so-called conspiracy theories that the Trump world put out in 2020 about Dominion were not all false, that Dominion was actually compromised for a long time, and that the use of the caricature, and I always go back to this, the caricature of the claims that they made in 2020 to discredit any legitimate conversation about the concerns surrounding election security and election integrity. But I'd love to get your thoughts on the purchase of Dominion and what this means for our elections.
Yes. I'm glad. I'm actually writing the next in the series at the moment about the registration numbers. And it's actually astounding to me because one of the things is I believe that the company who actually, and I have to do more research on this still, but I believe the company that bought Dominion is the same owner who owns No Ink. I think it's called No Ink, which is another competing voter registration database. So one of the things that I'm finding in my series is that the voter registration database and the vote tallying machines both seem to be compromised in St. Lucie County, but they're not connected. And what you are talking about with a Dominion being purchased is it's a vote tallying machine that's been purchased by a voter registration company. And so to me, it's like that's another piece of this whole thing. I will tell you that I did an article. It never got published. I'm happy to share it at some time. But it was about Venezuela. And it's funny because I did not see anything about Dominion. I've never really seen any evidence of Dominion, but I have seen that Dominion's vote count in St. Lucie County is missing batches. So I've now seen it. But I'm very familiar with the fact that Venezuela was using ES&S, which is the same company that I found issues with in Kentucky, and is an even bigger company that never gets mentioned. And Venezuela, I have to go back to this article. I'll send it to you for you to publish for your people, and maybe we'll have a separate conversation.
Sure.
But it was crazy because the ES&S machines were being accused of throwing the election in Venezuela, and they wound up like flying out the ES&S people so that they didn't have to cancel the elections in Venezuela to fix the machines. So this was way back. This was like in 2002, maybe. And I also do want to say that when we talk about all of these private vendors, not only is it crazy what's going on here, but the subject of my Kentucky research, Mitch McConnell, I've seen the videos where he stands up proudly talking about how he helped author HAVA, which is the Help America Vote Act, which was put in place in 2002 after the hanging chads in Florida. Mm-hmm. And it was the hanging chads in Florida apparently caused them to then go down this path of private vendors with electronic voting machines, which is what HAVA did. It actually brought all the states into having these machines. And not everybody in the world does it this way. In fact, I did an article at one point where I looked at our allies around the world. Whoa. We're an outlier using private vendors.
Big time. And I think especially, we started off this conversation talking about Russian interference, and those countries, especially in the Eastern Bloc, that have been living with Russian and Soviet interference for generations, understand the threat and understand how to mitigate it. And we're just over here acting oblivious, like we're exempt, or God knows. I mean, you get to the point where you start to think that a lot of people are complicit in this on both sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah, I'm not ruling anything out. And yes. One thing I will just say is we are very focused right now on gerrymandering, as we should be. We know that there's voter suppression. We know there's gerrymandering. Why do we think that these private run voting machines and voting systems that we know the Russians got into, why do we think they're exempt from any interference?
It's crazy. Insanity to think that. It's insanity, Alison.
It is. So we're trying to pull back the election curtain.
let us, I want to ask you two major questions before you leave us tonight. And I'll give them to you. You take them in whatever order you want to. One, how does your investigation in St. Lucie County expand or extrapolate beyond St. Lucie County and the state of Florida? Can those patterns and findings apply to other states? And two, and we probably handle this last, what are we doing about the 2026 election? How does your election series address that and the movement that you're trying to start?
I'm so glad you asked that. So I'll try and touch on the first one. Absolutely. This is going beyond St. Lucie County. This is going beyond Florida, because what we've actually found in Florida with, for example, the voter registration records, we're actually seeing signs of this all over the Rockland County. So many people, and I speak with Lulu and Smart Elections. I'm so glad that they're taking on what they're taking on. The patterns we're seeing in Florida and St. Lucie are the same as in the Rockland County election litigation that's currently going on. Okay. So the lawsuits in Rockland County, New York are the same patterns we're seeing in Florida. We also have just before the November 2024 election. So in October, Pennsylvania, I believe it was Lancaster County, found potentially 3,000 fraudulent voter registration applications. That's the same thing we're talking about, adding voters to the rolls. That investigation has led back to, I believe their reporting is that it goes back to an Arizona councilman, but it's stalled. We also have the DOJ in June or July, I think, charged a Nevada couple with actually submitting 500 false voter registration applications in Minnesota. And in that charging,
DOJ?
Believe it or not, yes. I don't know how it snuck past them,
Okay.
but this Nevada couple said that they were being paid by a foundation, which is actually called Foundation One. And that foundation has not been disclosed and has not been stopped to our knowledge. So they got the couple who put in 500 voter registration applications, but how many more people are on the payroll of this foundation that is currently sitting hidden behind the DOJ? And we don't know anything about that foundation. So we're seeing, and we actually had like 130 voter registration applications in, I think it's Pinellas County, Florida, where they were found guilty of putting in these fake voter registrations. It was a Russian national and an Uzbekistan national. The Uzbekistan national was given time served and is being deported back to Uzbekistan, where I guess they can continue to.
Oh, wow. How lucky he gets to go back to Uzbekistan and not the Sudan or, you know,
not El Salvador.
or CPAT. Wow.
I think that Marco Rubio and the State Department are sending him back to his
Native
original
land.
country, where he can continue doing whatever he wants to with the Florida elections.
Wow.
So to answer your question is, we're finding a lot of this around, signs of this around the country, but nobody's really been looking for it. So one of the things, I mean, Nathan and I have talked about, we've got a number of different actions we're planning on rolling out together. So our organization it's up to us. We're separate than Election Truth Alliance, but this is about all of us. It's up to all of us. And we're working together with a lot of people to try and roll out actions, because so many people want to do something. And we have actions we want to bring.
Give me a couple examples of those concrete actions for 2026, because this is so serious and we have such a limited amount of time. Listen, you're never going to hear me stop beating the drum roll of he needs to be impeached, convicted, and removed now, because we cannot put our stock in some future eventuality. This is why we're in the position we're in now, because we have always been saying that our salvation is going to come at some later date, when it is right now that we need to take care of it. But for those of us who are also, I mean, of course, I'm an American citizen. I believe in the voice of the people in American democracy. That is the very cornerstone of what makes us a representative republic. If we can't trust in our elections, we have truly lost it all. And I think, honestly, that's what got us to this point in 2024. But what are some concrete actions that you're planning on building out just for the 2026 election, or in time for it?
Sure. So we're actually, we really, although we've spent a year on this, we're trying to get it out a year before 2026, because we're putting out actions where we're going to try and build kind of a citizens coalition. And, you know, people are already out there knocking on doors to actually say, you know, vote for this person or vote for that person. But we can also, just like I did with Nathan, where we kind of targeted what doors you're knocking on, we can be cleaning up the voter rolls in the meantime and forcing our leadership to clean up the voter rolls, because we're concerned that there are people who are voting for other people, that there are too many people on the voter rolls, and it's not getting enough attention. We're also looking at public ways that we can ask our leaders and put in pressure campaigns to our leaders to secure the elections in ways they haven't even thought about, but including the voter rolls. We're even taking some kind of unique, it's up to us, is focused on the elections, but we're looking at other ways. And I can tell you right now that we're getting ready to also roll out a tax strike, which we haven't revealed anywhere. I've talked to you about it a little bit, and maybe we can come back and look at that separately. But this tax strike would be about using our financial tax dollars. And any strike, you put demands and say, you know, and some of those demands maybe as crucial as saying you cannot be picking up and kidnapping people off of the streets and sending them to, you know, God knows where. You can't be bulldozing the White House. You can't be doing all of these things. But one of the things is we can also be demanding free and fair elections for 2026 and use our tax dollars to do it. So those are the kinds of creative, really radical approaches. We're looking at doing it legally, and we have been working on that.
I think that's really exciting, because I think, you know, the taxation without representation, which so many of us feel right now, is so real. And yet we want to be law-abiding citizens. We don't want to expose ourselves in ways that are just, you know, harder than not paying taxes in the first place. So I'm really excited to talk to you in the future about that.
Alison, can't wait. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm so glad I was able to give you this platform to expose these findings. I hope everybody follows you on your Substack, which is It's Up to Us. It's up to us.substack.com. I know Alison has a lot in the works. This is just the beginning. Thank you so much for being with me tonight.
Jessica, thank you so much for shining a light on all of this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight on Lights On. As you've seen behind me on this whole show, we are planning a massive event in Washington, D.C. on November 22nd, 2025. This is distinct from No Kings in that we are making an explicit demand. We are leveraging our power and our pressure in the place that it matters most, in Washington, D.C., and demanding that our lawmakers take action to remove this tyrannical regime. Please join us in Washington, D.C. on November 22nd. It actually starts on the 20th. Our very, very important congressional actions that the Removal Coalition has pioneered, where we got the largest ever coalition and peaceful protest lobbying Congress back on September 2nd to lobby for impeachment. We're going to do that again starting on the 20th. Right before Congress goes home for their Thanksgiving break. So November 20th to 22nd. The 22nd is the big day. We've got the Dropkick Murphys. We've got some other big artists that we're about to announce. I'm so excited. We're going to have fun, but we mean business. Please, if you can at all possible, this is the day that you do not want to miss. Join us in Washington, D.C. on 11/20/22. If you want to support the efforts that are going to pay for this very, very expensive production, you can also do that at removetheregime.com. Removetheregime.com. Just to be clear, nobody's getting paid here. The artists are not getting paid. The influencers that are joining us are most certainly not getting paid. This is simply to pay for the costs of the very significant infrastructure that we need to pull off this event. So you can do that at removetheregime.com. Thank you, as always, everybody, for joining me tonight. Thank you to the members of the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. Please, if you haven't yet, subscribe now. Have a wonderful rest of your night. We're going to have a great week ahead, because we are actually doing the work to save our democracy. As always, my friends, let your light shine.